Okay, here's my audience. Everybody wave. Okay. Did you know that right now there are 3,035 men and women facing capital punishment in this country? According to the death penalty facts that are on CNN.com, over 3,000 people who are sitting in a cell using up valuable tax dollars on food, education, and appeals. Even though they have been convicted of crimes so heinous, we have decided that they are not worthy of life. For example, how do you feel about the funding of the lives of Jose Sandoval, Jorge Galindo, or Eric Vela? 3 of the 4 men who robbed the Norfolk U.S. Bank branch on September 27, 2002, killing 5 people. What about paying for the lunch for John Lauder, who has been sitting on death row since 1996 for the 1993 Humboldt, Nebraska murder of Tina Brandon, a crime popularized by the film Boys Don't Cry? I believe there is a serious problem with death penalty in this country. The fact is that after being sentenced to death, the average inmate sits for 10 years waiting for their sentence to be carried out, though some have gone as long as 20 years or longer. What a tremendous waste of resources. For example, in 2014 alone, the state of California spent over $1 billion incarcerating their death row inmates, of which they have 745 compared to Nebraska's 11. This information is available at deathpenaltyinfo.org. It is my belief that at the conclusion of this presentation, you will feel as I do, that definite changes are needed in the way the capital punishment system operates in this country. Capital punishment is not new to America. It dates back as far as time, with even the slightest crimes being punished by death. Once a court system was established in the New World, public executions were a town affair. In 1834, Pennsylvania became the first state to move executions into prisons, most likely because it was too gruesome for the women and children of that time. Throughout time, many states have abolished and reinstated the death penalty, with the U.S. Supreme Court putting an overall ban on it in 1972, only to have it reinstated in 1976. Over that time, several methods of execution have been used, including firing squads, gas chambers, hangings, electrocutions, and most recently added and most widely used, lethal injection. A series of 3 drugs is given: a barbiturate to put the prisoner to sleep, a paralyzing agent to stop the movement of the lungs and the diaphragm, and lastly, potassium chloride to cause a cardiac arrest and death. And this is according to an article entitled How Lethal Injection Works, found on howstuffworks.com. There are those that say this method is no more humane than others, but I wonder why it matters. It's not as though these men and women were sentenced with penalties as far as like jaywalking or stealing a loaf of bread. These are serious crimes, specifically a brutal, intentional kind of murder to earn yourself a place on death row. A list of the top 10 men currently on death row is available at listverse.com. Which brings us to the question, what are our tax dollars going to in this situation? Surely everyone is aware that a portion of the money paid in taxes goes to the prison system to maintain the facilities where we house the society's criminals, as well as the wages paid to the guards for their service. But what else? First, the trial. The trial of a death row inmate can cost the state millions in millions of resources. For example, Jodi Arias, who is currently pleading her case in Arizona as to why she should be allowed to live her remaining years in prison rather than being sentenced to death for the horrifying 2000 murder of her lover, Travis Alexander, has cost the state upwards of $2 million already. That's a lot of pothole repairs and money that could go to upgrading the state's school lunch program. After they were sentenced, it is required that inmates are provided with 3 meals a day, which even at a quarter a meal, because let's face it, prison food probably isn't exactly a 5-star rating dining, that's $273 a year. What about education? Inmates are often allowed to participate in correspondence college programs, meaning your tax dollars are used to fund their education. How does that make you feel? As pointed out by my wife in our previous discussion about the death penalty, she, myself, and likely every one of you at this moment are accruing student loan debt. But not them. They broke the law, deciding other person's life was worthless, yet they are able to educate themselves for positions they will never fill. And what about the appeals process? Millions of dollars are spent every year while these subhumans argue that the nitpicky details of their conviction, arguing everything from planted evidence to improper procedures, having to save anything to save their skin. Well, maybe they should have thought about that before committing a crime. If there's anything we've learned from shows like the Forensic Files or CSI, you're going to get caught. Some people are of the camp that if you're not going to execute them, then why don't we sentence them to life in prison and be done with it? An excellent point, even one made in my discussion group prior to this presentation. It was stated that perhaps a life spent forever behind bars would actually be worse than if they were put to the death. Just because of the knowledge of that might be worse than being executed alone. If we were in a country that, like so many other industrialized democracies that do not have the death penalty, I would agree with this as a valid point. However, we still do, and I believe if a person has been adjudicated to die, then their sentence should be carried out. It surely wasn't a decision that was made lightly by those responsible for deciding. It is, after all, someone's life. But Jason, you say, what if they were innocent? What if they claimed innocent the whole time, filed appeal after appeal, fighting the conviction? It happens. Sometimes innocent people are convicted. The judicial system is not perfect. Law enforcement often feels community pressure to find the person responsible. Such is the case for Damien Eccles, who was sentenced to death at the age of 18, maintained his innocence until he was finally freed in 2011. Many people rallied for the young man, and by extension his friends, who also went down with him. It was believed that these three men, also known as the West Memphis Three, were railroaded because they liked rock music and wore black. But it stands to reason that most of the time, those found guilty are in fact guilty. While there is no way to know how many of the 1,200 people executed since 1976 were innocent, it stands to reason that most of them weren't. However, there is a specific case of Cameron Willingham. He was put to death in 2004 for a 1991 arson fire, which killed 3 children in Texas. However, it seems the report was somehow flawed and unable to point to the fire being arson. It's an imperfect system. For example, a young man named Jeremy Sheets was involved in a racially motivated kidnapping, rape, and murder of an Omaha teenager. He was tried, convicted, and sentenced to death. But his conviction was overturned on a technicality, and now this man is free to walk the streets and kill again. But what can be done to improve the functionality of the system? Well, how can it be made better, more efficient, more productive? Some people suggest using death row inmates as sort of a guinea pig for medical testing. This would be a sure hit with the PETA supporters, and would there be such a better use of the inmates than just sitting there waiting, wasting away, ready to die? Or perhaps they could be used as frontline in the defense of war. However, they do like to kill people, and after all, if they do survive, we can just leave them in the country. They're sort of like exile. They're no longer our problem. But what can you do? How can you make changes? Without becoming a politician yourself, there are several ways you can make this viewpoint heard. You can write a letter to our congressman, who for our immediate area is Jeff Fortenberry. You can also start a website or a letter writing campaign, which would require you do some homework on your own, research on the topic, and then share that information. I believe if we all took a stand to further protect ourselves from the continued crimes by death row inmates, it would be a positive step for America. Thank you for taking all the time that you've given me today to listen to my presentation. I appreciate your attention, and I hope that I have made an impact on your thought process. Maybe next time you hear about a death row inmate sitting for 20 years waiting for their death day, you will remember what a huge waste of resources that is, and it will anger and further inspire you to fight for change.